Frank Hu, who's the chair of Harvard. He went over that hypothesis there, reverse causation. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's in your best interest to just like concede that like there's plenty of evidence to show that cholesterol does cause heart disease, or at least there's a very strong, if in your case, if you want to even say it's a very strong reason to suggest that it is.
Well, it's just that I'm not sure of the Mendelian study, but again, the current drugs we have also lower inflammation in the blood vessels as well as lower cholesterol levels. So I can't be sure whether it's the inflammation or the cholesterol. But let's just say, it's the cholesterol, right? And let's just say I concede it. I mean, as I said, the reason why I don't quite agree is because the medications also affect the inflammation. And I actually personally think it's the inflammation that's a much stronger cause. But they happen to be very associated.
Do you have evidence? Do you have a Mendelian randomization study where cholesterol does not correlate, but inflammation does?
No, but the thing is, cholesterol and inflammation.
Oh wait, you don't have evidence then? You don't have evidence?
Evidence that they come hand in hand?
No, you just made the claim that, well, it could be the case that it's actually inflammation because drugs tend to lower inflammation. First of all, you kind of ignored the point I said where you can have people who are in an average population on a SAD diet or smoking or whatever, and they still have that impact, that reduced risk. But second of all, you need to actually show evidence. You need to show preferably some kind of like meta-analysis of randomized, let's say, Mendelian studies like I did where, okay, well, cholesterol is not correlating at all, but inflammation is. I mean, if you're not going to provide that evidence, then I wouldn't make that claim, right?
If you just look here, statins, which are the common way to lower cholesterol, are strong anti-inflammatory agents.
Yeah, but do you think that that's going to get you to where you want to go? I mean, like, I'm talking about cholesterol lowering.
Yes, it lowers cholesterol and lowers inflammation, so you can't know which one. But let's just say cholesterol causes the heart disease, stroke, atherosclerosis, right? So let's just say I concede that, because there's another problem to it that comes before that, in that I don't think eating tons of meat, for example, causes your cholesterol to go up in the first place. I mean, you can see here, like, so a lot of people say, oh, if you eat.
Oh, I lost you. Hello?
Oh, sorry. Like, the thing is, when I try to go to a web browser, I can't talk. But anyway, so I guess a lot of people say if you eat a lot of meat, your cholesterol levels are going to go up from all the cholesterol, saturated fat, things like that.
We're going to get into that next, but I want to get through this cholesterol point, okay?
Sure.
So,
no, I already conceded it.
No, but there's a study here that addresses what you were saying. There's a study here that addresses what you were saying, okay? So what I mentioned to you was you'd have to show some kind of Mendelian study where if you actually do a Mendelian randomization study, there's going to be no correlation whatsoever with cholesterol, but there is going to be one with CRP. And what we found here, if you look, there is a Mendelian study right here. Association between C-reactive proteins, inflammatory marker, and coronary heart disease Mendelian randomization analysis based on individual participant data. So they did this study and they found that there's human genetic data indicate that C-reactive protein inflammation concentration itself is unlikely to even be modest causal factor in coronary heart disease. So would you at least concede that you were wrong on that?
Sorry, could you restate that one more time? I'm just not familiar with this study. I'm looking at it.
Okay, so this is a Mendelian study. It's a genetic study. Okay, so they looked at whether or not basically CRP, which is an inflammatory marker, itself is a causative agent to heart disease. And they found that it wasn't. And that was your claim, was that, well, it could be that, inflammation is correlating alongside LDL. And that just doesn't follow. And again, you didn't link Mendelian study, you linked some kind of statin paper inflammatory agent, and that's not the consensus that it's inflammation that lowers the risk. It's the cholesterol.
All right, sure. I'd have to look at this paper more to understand it fully, like as to whether CRP is the only indicator for inflammation. But I mean, okay, so far it looks like cholesterol seems to be the more likely indicator as opposed to inflammation. Then, if CRP is the reliable indicator for it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's great. So then the next thing that I'd like to go over is I linked a study here, dietary lipids and blood cholesterol quantitative meta-analysis metabolic ward study. So if we go to this one here. So you mentioned that, you don't think it's the case that red meat is going to increase cholesterol or in terms of, so if we look at what does increase cholesterol, it's going to be saturated fatty acids. They have the ability to like modulate the amount of receptors and stuff like that. So they do raise cholesterol. So the ingestion of saturated fat, and you can look at the ratio of saturated to polyunsaturated to figure this out more. But what they did was they looked at, are you familiar with metabolic ward experiments?
Sorry, which paper are you looking at, or are you not looking at any paper?
Dietary lipids and blood cholesterol quantitative meta-analysis of metabolic ward. Okay. So a metabolic ward study is basically where they kind of put you into a situation where you're going to be made to track everything that is basically ingested. So they track all calories, they track all grams of food, etc. And they usually do this in something like a hotel or something like that to make it ethical. You wouldn't want to lock people in a room, right? It's obviously unethical. But so they've done 395 of these. And these are extremely well-controlled experiments, randomized studies, where they essentially, like I say, they track everything. They are very meticulous about it, and they do a huge multivariate analysis and stuff like that. And so what they found was that basically isocaloric, which means the same amount of calories, so replacing the same amount of calories of saturated fat by carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, for 10% of dietary calories resulted in blood cholesterol falling by 0.5 to 0.03 millimoles per liter. And low density lipoprotein cholesterol, so low density, so the LDL fell even more. And the isocaloric replacement of, like, it goes on to talk about this kind of stuff here. So, and basically in typical British diets, replacing 60% of saturated fat by other fats and avoiding 60% of dietary cholesterol would reduce blood cholesterol by about 0.8 millimoles per liter. 10 to 15%, with 4/5 being LDL. So this is a huge data set. We're talking 395 separate studies, metabolic ward studies. And what they can actually do is they can actually, there's actually equations they can do to predict the change in cholesterol. So I can link a few of them here. There's a lot of meta-regressions on this. So like there's one here, and I'll post another one here. This is from Hegstead, and this one's from Minsink. So if you see these charts here, each one of those dots are an experiment, a separate experiment. And what they did was they ran an equation, right? So they said, okay, here's my equation. I'm going to set up my equation, and I'm going to make a prediction based on how much saturated fat I'm going to eat, or dietary cholesterol. And I'm going to predict how much my cholesterol is going to rise, and I'm going to plot that. That's what they did. So this is basically the observed change versus the predicted change. And you can see it's almost a perfect linear line at this point. So to say that there's no correlation, or that, that this doesn't raise cholesterol, is just absurd. Like, I mean, these are, and again, there's another one down here. This one includes dietary cholesterol. And again, same idea. Each one of these dots is an experiment, and they all show predicted versus the change in serum cholesterol. And there's an extremely strong relationship here that I don't see how you can deny, especially with observational studies.
This is a very good study. It's not observational, so that's cool. I'm just looking for where, it says what kind of saturated fat, like how they were consuming this stuff, whether it was from processed foods or it was from meat or it was from, vegetables, whatever. Can you point to where it says like they ate meat for the saturated fats, or are you just saying it seems that like saturated fat from any kind of food has increased the cholesterol regardless of what kind of food it was?
Yeah, we can get into that. In terms of what source, I think it was butter that they used here. I think there might have been other sources. Let me just see. Or saturated fats. So chiefly in dairy products, meat, oil, spreads, eggs, confectionery, and where daily cholesterol intake is pseudotherium, chiefly meat. I don't know. I think one of the guys in here would know more about that, the details of it. But I know that one of the things they used was butter, I believe, in this particular study. Yeah, but I mean, the idea is that if we look to the outcome data in terms of red meat, we do see this predicted increase. So this is kind of like we're saying that a food that has high amounts of saturated fat, we should predict that it would raise cholesterol based on this because we have these metabolic wart studies. And if we can find, what we want to do is we want to look at outcome-based data in terms of red meat and see if there's actually not only an increase in cholesterol, but an increase in like mortality, all-cause mortality or cause-specific mortality. So we do have those, and I have 47, I think 50 of them that implicate meat in terms of meat and saturated fat in heart disease. So this is another one. I'll just link this one. Okay, so do you know what a meta-analysis is, by the way? I'm sure you do, right?
Analyses.
A what?
Yeah, a meta-analysis is analyzing the accuracy, verifying other studies, and summarizing a lot of them.
Essentially, yeah. It's just you're taking a large amount of data and you're doing like a meta-analytic summation of the data. So if we look at this one, this is 47 systematic reviews and meta-analyses on saturated fat. Key takeaways were that basically saturated fat, let me just find the key takeaways that they had. This is a big paper, it's like 400 pages. You can go through, they talk about basically everything you can think of in terms of that. So that's one thing that we can look at. It talks about meat in here, it talks about PUFAs, carbohydrates, proteins, where those saturated fats are coming from, all that kind of thing. So then we can look at like the outcome, like I said, the outcome on meat intake. Let's see if I get this one. Oh wait, that's the same one. Oops. One second. My link didn't work. Okay.
I feel like it might be very easy to get bogged down in all these studies, but for the sake of interest and time, I think it would be good to talk about the various nutrients we can see in meat and plants. I mean, what I was saying originally was just that plants don't have omega-3, they don't have vitamin D, they don't have vitamin K, they don't have vitamin A, and you're going to be missing all of those. I mean, that's my main thing. Whereas in a steak or a liver, you can get all of those.
But the idea I'm trying to get to you is that if your hypothesis is that, first of all, it's not the case that plants don't have these nutrients, and we'll get into that, but or that you can't get those nutrients from plants. That's not true, and we'll get into that. But the idea here is that if it was the case that red meat increased cardiovascular